So you get a new computer, you're all excited, you boot it up, and you realize that it's slow. How could this possibly happen? A new computer being slow. It does happen. And we recently saw a big computer company that actually scammed an elderly man. We're going to talk about this. Make sure you stick around to the end because we'll show you how you can make sure this doesn't happen to you. One of the things we wanted to cover is computer performance and really how sometimes the big guys can actually configure a computer. Quite often really they do this. They configure computers so that they're actually slower than what they should be, slower than what you're paying for. And really one of the things when you buy a new computer, you want that computer to be faster than the computer you've already bought. And sadly, sometimes that doesn't always happen. We've had multiple customers that do buy computers that are slower than the ones they already have. And I don't care how good of a deal you get, if you actually are paying money for something that's worse than what you had before, that's a loss in my book. You can get a great deal. You know what? If you get a great deal and that computer is junk, if it's slow, if it doesn't perform well, then what I would encourage you to do is take it back. Don't actually pay money for a new computer that's actually slow. Well, one of the things that we saw in our shop recently, we actually had a customer bring in a computer, and we were looking at the computer, and he was complaining. His complaint was this computer's slow. And we're looking at the computer and we're saying, well, your processor's fast enough. The processor is what does the brains of the function. Basically it's kind of like the brains. It does all the mathematical calculations. You have plenty of RAM. Your computer should be quick. And what you really need, because we saw that he had a Platter hard drive. Now what a Platter hard drive is, it's a standard drive. So it looks like this. If you're watching on the live stream, this is actually a Seagate drive, and this drive has metal platters on the inside of it. They actually spin. The metal platters actually spin at the rate will depend. 5,400 RPMs, 7,200 RPMs. Some in a laptop might only go 4,500. And a very fast desktop drive, it might go to 10,000, or even to 15,000, like in a SCSI drive. But even still, these drives are slow. They're mechanical. They're more prone to failure. People ask us, well, why did my drive fail? Well, have you ever had a part on a car that failed? Yeah. And people will say, well, I don't understand. It was working yesterday. Have you had a part on the car that failed? Yes, they've had a part on the car that failed. Was it working before it stopped working? Yes. So this is, with Platter hard drives, you have actually moving parts. And because of the moving parts, the nature of it, there's actually an arm that moves back and forth, reads and writes the data magnetically. It also has to get to a certain place where the data is, if it's reading data, or to a blank spot if it's writing data. And so because of the mechanical nature of it, it is slow. It actually has limitations because of the mechanical nature of it. It also is more prone to failure. There are electronics and there's magnetics also that can go bad. And sometimes those go bad and the mechanics are actually working, but quite often it's the mechanics that go bad. And one of the things that happens with Platter hard drives is they're very susceptible to power fluctuations and power outages. And those of you that live in South Florida, that in the summertime we have a lot of thunderstorms and there are power fluctuations. We actually had a short power outage at our house this morning. So if you have this Platter hard drive and the platters are those disks are spinning and the heads are moving back and forth and all of a sudden it stops, that can cause damage to the drive. Well, these are slow. The newer way of doing it is with an SSD drive. So what we actually said with this one customer is, hey, listen, what you need to do is you actually need to get an SSD drive in here. And so the customer actually approved having us install an SSD. He was going to buy an SSD drive from us and have us do a data transfer where we take his old drive and image it over to the new SSD drive, and everything works just like it did before. It just much, much faster. Well, we opened it up when we were ready to do the work, and you know what? We could have sold him that SSD drive. But when we opened up the computer, what we found is that he already had an SSD drive that he paid for when he bought his computer. And from the factory, his computer came with an SSD drive, which is super fast. I mean, it's so fast that if you don't have an SSD drive and you go to an SSD drive, you're going to wonder why you didn't do that earlier. But he actually had this SSD drive in his computer, and one of the things, but really from the factory, the operating system and the programs were supposed to be configured to run on that SSD drive, and the Platter hard drive was supposed to be a data partition, was supposed to just be there just to store data. Well, one of the things that did happen with that is that the factory, some bozo, we'll call him Bozo the Clown, but he was masquerading as a technician in this with this big company. He actually, instead of configuring the fast SSD drive as the primary drive and using the Platter drive as a data drive where speed is not quite as important, what this bozo did is configured the operating system to run on the slow drive and have the fast SSD drive be the data. So the operating system, the programs were loading off of this slow drive, and then what you had is again you had this fast SSD drive for the data. Well, this was just ridiculous, and we didn't sell him a new SSD drive. We used the SSD drive that was already in his computer, and we imaged his hard drive to that SSD drive, and then we actually a lot of times when we do that, we actually disconnect the Platter drive and just keep it in there as a backup because it has all their information, and unless they need it as for data, we don't want to leave it connected with the operating system because sometimes Windows gets confused and will start booting off of the slower drive, and we've seen that happen before where the Windows will actually boot off of the slower drive instead of the newer, faster SSD drive. And so one of the things, we actually were able to get this guy's computer running quickly without him having to actually buy a new drive because he already had a drive and had the big computer company that he bought the computer from in the first place done what they should have done from the factory instead of having Bozo the IT tech do the work. Well, he would have been performing, his computer would have performed quickly, and he never would have needed to bring it to us to have us actually increase the performance of the system. So this is something you want to definitely make sure that if you have an SSD drive, first of all, when you buy a computer, you want to have an SSD drive. If you have a computer that doesn't have an SSD drive, then you want to actually upgrade to an SSD drive as long as the processor is fast enough to do that. And in addition to that, if you actually buy a computer with an SSD and it has a Platter hard drive also, you want to make sure that the SSD is the default drive. Now I'm going to show you, I'm going to switch over to a full screen. I'll verbally describe this for those that are listening on the radio. But for those that are watching the live stream or watch this after the fact, I'm going to switch over to a full screen so that you can actually see this. What I'm going to do is launch the window or the task manager. Now I did that by holding down the Control and the Shift key and then pressing Escape. On many computers, you can also do Control Alt Delete. Sometimes that will automatically launch the task manager. Sometimes it will launch a window where you can choose. Let me see if I can do that right now. So here's security options. That's what it does. You can choose the task manager. I'm going to click cancel, but that's the window that comes up. So what we're going to do here, this is Windows 11. So if you have another operating system, it may look a little bit different than this. But here in Windows 11, this is where I can look at my disk performance, my memory, and my CPU, the percentages of the capacity or throughput that are being used. So with the drive here, we're looking at throughput. With the memory, we're looking at what percentage of the memory, or the CPU, we're looking what percentage of the capacity is being used currently. So one of the things, and by the way, the disk performance is not always accurate in Windows 10 or Windows 11. Sometimes we've seen Platter hard drives that really are operating at 100% throughput that are showing low throughput on this window. But typically the CPU and the memory are good here. You can actually click on individual columns and you can sort by columns and see what program is actually using up resources. This is one way to see if your computer's slow, why it's slow. But you want to go to performance. Now on Windows 11, that's on the left. On Windows 10, it's across the top. And what you can actually see is the performance graph. I'm going to move the Skype. We're actually connected to the studio today via Skype. But you actually see little spikes on the CPU. The CPU, again, does all the mathematical calculations. We can also click on memory and look at the RAM memory and see what percentage of the RAM memory is being used. But then we're going to look at the drives, the C drive and see, I actually have a C and an E that are on one drive, and then I have the D drive that's on a second drive. And these drives, what we actually see here, we actually see, it spikes up as things, and I'm actually streaming this show right now, and I'm recording it, so data is being used and is being written to these drives, and that does, you'll see spikes up sometimes, but most of the time the throughput is very low because this is a very fast SSD. What we see though with Platter hard drives quite often, especially right when you turn your computer on, sometimes even up to 5 minutes or more without doing anything else, you'll see this graph all the way up to the top. We'll see this all the way up to the top, and that means that the computer is getting, or the drive is getting the data to the computer as quickly as it can, but it's not getting it there quickly enough because it's working as hard as it can, and that's why your computer is slow if you have that running right at the top. What I can do maybe one day is take a video of a computer that is where the drive is all the way at the top, and you'll actually be able to see that. And by the way, some Platter hard drives have a small SSD drive that serves as cache, and Windows will actually report that as an SSD drive. But if you see the throughput all the way up to the top, it's either not an SSD or it's an SSD that's not working very well. And if you have a situation like this and you want to go faster, well, we can help you go faster. And that's what we are here, a faster PC. We can help your computer perform faster with an SSD upgrade. I hope you've liked this video, that you've learned something from it. If you have, please click the like button, click subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when we release new videos. And remember, when you have computer problems, you need a faster PC.